Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are in Matthew chapter 7, and we're going to be talking about judging. Jesus is going to kind of warn us. You can say warn the hypocrite, okay, about judging. What is interesting about this, about judging, you could say, is the ideal 7 and why did they do that? Anyway, when we talk about judging today, there are a lot of people that try to use the term judging as a crutch. In other words, if you say anything critical about them, then they will say you're judging me. And what they do is they take that to say or to mean that we shouldn't say or criticize them, or we should not um, ever point out anything bad, or if character flaws or anything like that. Um, but let's kind of see what Jesus actually said about this when he says, look at chapter 7, verse 1 says, "Do not judge so that you won't be judged." Notice that. So don't judge so that you won't be judged. Now, what did Jesus mean by this? And by the way, the context here, he's going to really clarify what he means. So here's what he doesn't mean. He doesn't mean that you can never criticize someone, or that you cannot point out someone's fault, whether positive or negatively. In other words, if you see someone doing something or behaving badly, does that mean that you shouldn't say to that person that you're behaving badly? I'll come back to that because I think there's some nuance that we need to understand. But notice what he says about here, do not judge so that you won't be judged. But let's go on now and read what he says. Excuse me, for with the same judgment you use, you will be judged, and with the same measure you use, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but don't notice the log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, and look, there's a log in your eye? Hypocrite! First take the log out of your eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Now, if you notice, he does leave room for you to be able to judge, or to, right? Notice he says, if you first take the speck out of your eye, or the log out of your eye, let's see, hypocrite said, first take the log out of your eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. So think about this. There's room that you can, in a sense, judge, but he also tells us the parameters of that. He also tells us, first and foremost, don't be a hypocrite. The word judge here means to assume it means to pronounce judgment. When he says don't judge, you could say don't take the office or the position as a judge over someone. Now, he says don't judge so that you won't be judged. So let's stop for a moment and keep this in mind, why Jesus is saying this. Jesus is saying this so that what? We can be the light of the world. But So understand in this context here, he says, don't judge so that you won't be judged. In other words, if you're a judge, if you're the one that's being judged, then you're not being the light. In other words, people are looking at your fault. You know, they're it's almost like today when you see preachers, just as an example, that the louder they cry on some sin, you almost can say for sure they're guilty of it, especially when it comes to homosexuality, right? I'm reminded of a person who was running for office, and he would cry so loud, against the trans community, and then come to find out he loves trans porn. Now, so what if Jesus says, "Don't judge, so that you won't be judged"? So what happens? The louder he cried, and yet when it was discovered, so now people are judging him. So let's put balance now. Does that mean again that we can't criticize someone? The answer is, of course, you should be. But here is also the other nuance. Providing you're kind of in a place. Wisdom would say this. Now, I don't want to go too deep into this, but let's say, for example, people will take upon themselves sometimes to correct you. And they don't even know you, right? They don't even know you. And so when Jesus says here, don't judge so that you won't be judged. In other words, it's going to be immediately turned on you. Why? For with the judgment, the rendering, he says you use, the kind of judgment that you use. And if you're judging someone for being a bad person, or if you're judging someone for having a character flaw, he says the same judgment will be used against you. They're going to judge you the same way. And if they do that, but guess what? They're not going to be listening to you. They're not going to be looking at your light. So he clarifies by saying, why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but don't notice the log in your own eye? Of course, Jesus is using hyperbole here, right? In other words, his giant log in your eye, which renders you impossible to see, but yet you are trying to correct the speck in your brother's eye. So there's a lot of ways you can apply that, right? There's a lot of ways you can apply that, right? You could say in the most broadest term, don't try to correct someone for being a sinner when you yourself are a sinner. Now, as I said, this is not to say, for example, that you cannot bring out someone's fault. Like, if people come, especially if someone comes and asks you for advice, he's not telling you not to tell the truth. And even in the sense that he's not telling you to speak truth. He's just telling you not to be a hypocrite when you are speaking the truth. Secondly, the context here is you taking it upon yourself, in a sense, to intrude on someone's life. You taking it upon yourself, I'm going to be the corrector. I'm going to correct what's wrong in your life. Well, Jesus says this. Well, before you take on that role, make sure that you don't have any logs. Make sure that you have removed the logs out of your life, out of your eyes. I would find this, that just on what Jesus says, right? First, take out the log out of your eye. And it's kind of interesting that he used that. When it comes to your eye, notice he says, as you now are rendering judgment, as you're sitting as a judge over people, he says, make sure that if you're going to sit in that seat, that you have removed the log from your eye. So watch this. If you then focus on removing the log from your eye, you're going to find that you're going to spend more time on yourself than on correcting others. Okay? In other words, you to be presumptuous to intrude in someone else. But he says, if you do remove the log, watch what he says. You will see clearly. See? I will say you will see clearly with humility, with wisdom to remove the speck from someone's eye. Sometimes, and I'll say this, I know in my life, it took years to realize how much I don't know, how much I better just work on myself, right? It took years for me to say, let me just work on myself, uh, rather than concentrating on all the specks in all of the people's eyes. Okay? Now, so on the other hand, let's say, and I think we do live in a society where people want to deflect their sins. They don't want you saying anything about their sins. They don't want you commenting on anything about their sins. And I'm going to say, okay, fine, don't. Don't. Now, I think people should be very careful that if you don't want people to comment on you and whatever that is, don't bring them into the circle. Especially some of the issues that we deal with, I think we should be very careful about. I think we should be very careful about, in other words, if I don't want, I'll use myself, and I'm going to be comical about that. If I don't want anybody talking about my bald head, I certainly shouldn't be talking about any baldness, right? Or asking someone about baldness. Okay, I know I'm being humorous here. All right, so do not judge so that you won't be judged. For with the judgment that you use, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. If you're highly critical, if you're, very boisterous and belligerent, sometimes people come off that way. He says it's going to be measured to you in the same way. So he says, why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye, but don't notice the log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, and look at the log in your eye, and then notice? Hypocrite. First take the log out of your eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. Look at verse 6 now. Don't give what is holy to dogs, or toss your pearls before pigs, or they will trample them with their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. Now, this is a very interesting statement, how Jesus, in the midst of what he's talking about judging, mentions this statement here when he says, don't give what is holy to dogs. The key here is, notice he says, do not give what is holy to dogs. Now, he's not saying you can't interact, all right? But notice, do not give what is holy. So the word holy, when we see that word holy, it basically means what things that are set apart. In the pagan world, you would see a pagan temple and all the things in the pagan temple, the utensils, the furniture, or whatever. It was set apart for that pagan worship. And so believers use this word in the same way, that God is holy. So you remember when you see if you remember the burning bush, okay, the burning bush scene, when Moses saw this bush burning and he says, man, why isn't the bush being consumed? And as he approached the bush, the angel spoke and said, Moses, take off your sandals, for the ground that you are standing on is holy. Now, what is interesting about that is that the dirt itself wasn't pure. The dirt itself wasn't, anything more than that. It was always dirt. That you could have had spiders, bugs, whatever, crawling on the dirt. But what made it holy is that God says, I'm declaring this ground here around this bush as set apart for God, and you could say for that moment. Now, when the burning bush ceased, God left the scene. The ground was the dirt as anything else. There was not anything. Now, religious people, let me just say this, would have probably made a shroud to it, but in other words, it was holy because it was set apart from God. And that's simply it. So, the temple or the tabernacle in Moses' day in the Old Testament, and then the temple on Solomon's day, was a building that is set apart for God's use. And thus, excuse me, all of the things in the temple are holy and cannot be used in a common way. Okay, cannot be used in a common way. Later in the story, we're going to see where the Pharisees are going to challenge that. And Jesus was going to say, you all are ridiculous because, you're exalting things over the care of people. And Jesus is going to cite, well, at one point, David ate sacred bread. Why? Because he was hungry. All right. So when he says this, don't give what is holy or don't give what is set apart for God. And then he says to dogs. So he doesn't mean that you can't interact. By the way, let me just talk about the term dogs and pearls. Dogs and pigs. Remember that because there is a consistent use describing sinners, and you can even say the sin nature. That's important because later you'll see in First Timothy where he talks about those turning back from God, and he says they're like a dog that vomits up, right? It vomits and then turns around and licks up what it's vomit. And then it says, or a pig that after being washed will turn again and wallow in the mire. Okay? That's the nature of a pig. That's the point. In other words, a dog and a pig, that's their nature. So what does he say? For example, then, you would not give your pearls to pigs. You wouldn't put pearls, or you shouldn't waste time putting pearls on a pig. You would have to change the nature of the pig, because the pig is going to always be a pig. So that's why he says, now don't give what is holy then to dogs or toss your pearls before the pigs. Why? He says they would trample them with their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. And so you shouldn't be surprised if you give a vile person, a sinful person, good things. Now, even in our lives, why would you give a crack addict access to your money, to your things, right? If they haven't changed, that's their nature at this point. So you can, the illustration is then, don't give what is holy then to dogs. Don't give the things of God. Don't bring them into the congregation in this respect, and then put them in positions. And I can tell you, I have seen that over and over again, where as soon as a celebrity will say they are a Christian, they're going to be plastered on all of the Christian TV, the Christian TV networks. And when they expose their true nature, will be like, oh my God, I can't believe that they were like this. Well, why wouldn't you believe that if they haven't changed their nature? And then the fact that these Christian ministries and networks only are using them for publicity themselves, then But so, all right, guys, we will pick this up in the next study, and so don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to the Bible Plain and Simple. And it's, as always, if you have a thought, a comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.